history.
Live from New Delhi, you are watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I am Deepika Mehto, coming up in the next 30 minutes. Saudi Arabia set to host an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit in Riyadh on Saturday. Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu thanks soldiers for their contribution to nation's security. Israel revises down October 7 Hamas attack death toll to 1,200. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Brazilian President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva discuss the situation in West Asia and efforts to restore peace over a telephonic conversation. An International Cricket Council suspends Sri Lankan Cricket Board due to government interference. Saudi Arabia is hosting an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit in Riyadh today. Arab leaders, including Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi, is expected to attend the organization of Islamic Cooperation Summit in Riyadh. The Gaza crisis will be discussed during the summit. According to the statement of the Saudi Foreign Ministry issued on Friday, the joint Islamic-Arab summit comes in response to the exceptional circumstances taking place in Gaza. Israel's foreign ministry says the death toll from the 7th of October attack by Hamas has now been revised. Now the new official figure stands at around 1,200, which is down from the earlier estimate of 1,400. The ministry also said that the new count was not a final number and might change and also identify all the bodies. The updated figure comes more than 1 month after Hamas gunmen carried out an attack on towns and military bases in southern Israel. It included the killing of Israeli civilians, including women and children, in residential areas and at a music festival. Israeli authorities also say that Hamas also took more than 240 people captive during the attack, including Israeli soldiers and civilians, as well as people from numerous foreign countries. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a visit to an army base at the Gaza border. Netanyahu praised the soldiers for contributing to the safety and security of Israel. He also joined them for Sabbath service. The German parliament on Friday approved the implementation of a global minimum corporate tax as part of an international deal to ensure large companies pay a minimum tax rate of 15%. Multinational firms will have to pay that level of tax on all of the profits they make worldwide, regardless of where the profits are generated. In the year 2021, almost 140 countries agreed to an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development deal they are meant to implement from next year to prevent big companies like Alphabet's Google or Amazon avoiding taxation by transferring profits to low-tax countries. Now, Washington says President Joe Biden will meet his Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, on Wednesday in San Francisco. The meeting has been long anticipated, but only just confirmed. DD India's Andrew Wood reports from Hong Kong.
Well, goodness, this has been a long time coming. I mean, there'd been an expected meeting, or people have been talking about an expected meeting for weeks, but no one had actually pinned down a particular date until now. I think if you look at it from the Chinese side, what they want is, they've said in the past, when there were the idea of a meeting with, between Mr. Xi and Mr. Biden was mooted, that the Americans would have to be sincere. And they've said that a lot during the meetings or during the trips of senior American politicians since June, started with Antony Blinken, the American Foreign Minister, the Secretary of State, visiting Beijing. They've been saying that whenever Americans come, that they want America to be sincere. And I think this means, basically, that Beijing wants America probably to make some concessions to look good for President Xi. Obviously, China probably has to make some concessions itself in order that President Biden can go back to the White House and say, look, this summit has been worth it. And remember, it's the first time the two men have met for more than a year, and in that year, an awful lot of bad things happened to China's relationship with the United States and vice versa. Remember the spy balloon, the supposed spy balloon that flew through American airspace back in February, that America actually then shot down, which China always said was a scientific balloon. And then there's been more and more, there have been more and more incidents in the South China Sea, where some of America's allies, like the Philippines especially, have been prevented or certainly made life more difficult for them to supply bits or atolls in the South China Sea that the Philippines says belongs to them, and the Chinese say belong to them.
Russian artillery and drone attacks on Friday killed 3 people and damaged an unspecified infrastructure facility, power lines and a gas pipeline in Ukraine's south. Both the regions have come under regular shelling by Russian troops in occupied territory on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. An infrastructure facility, a gas pipeline and power lines, as well as 11 private houses have been damaged. Russia's defense ministry said on Friday it thwarted Ukrainian attempt to forge bridgehead on River Dnipro's east bank and on nearby islands, killing around 500 Ukrainian soldiers in the past week.
On November 9, personnel from a motorized rifle company in the Russian military grouping Dnipro, under the command of Senior Lieutenant Zolto Arsenalov, destroyed servicemen from a unit of Ukraine's 36th Marine Infantry Brigade as they were trying to gain a foothold on the left bank of the Dnipro River.
The UK economy is stagnating, but is not in recession, according to the country's latest official GDP figures. Now, there had been widespread expectation that the UK would have entered recession in the third quarter of the year. DD India correspondent Stuart Smith has a report.
This latest data means the value of goods and services produced by the UK barely changed from July to September at 0.0%. Imports were down in the third quarter, reflecting a lack of domestic spending, according to the Office for National Statistics. It says a small drop in the services sector and health and commercial property rentals was partially offset by small gains in the engineering, car sales and machinery leasing sectors. Some economists point to Bank of England monetary policy as the most relevant factor, with high interest rates successfully reducing inflation but also stifling growth. The New Economics Foundation blames institutional factors like a lack of investment in healthcare, resulting in people being too sick to work, and blaming high energy bills due to underinvestment in home insulation and alternative energy sources. The lack of growth is widely expected to continue into 2024, hovering around 0%, with the jury out on whether minimal growth or minimal recession is more likely over the next few months. Since just before the COVID pandemic, UK GDP has grown 1.8%, which puts it ahead of France, Germany and Japan, but means it's less productive than Italy and Canada. The US stands out amongst G7 nations, having grown 8% since before the pandemic. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who is responsible for government spending, says his new budget, to be announced the week after next, will focus on unlocking investment, getting people back into work and reforming public services to improve growth. The opposition Labour Party says the figures are further evidence the economy's not working under the Conservatives and working people are worse off. Stuart Smith in London, reporting for DD India.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva discussed the situation in the West Asia and called for an early resolution of the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi received a telephone call on Friday from the President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The two leaders shared concerns on the ongoing developments in West Asia. They also expressed deep concerns at terrorism, violence and a loss of civilian lives, and also called for concerted efforts for early resolution of the situation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also conveyed India's full support for the success of Brazilian presidency of the G20. They also discussed ways to further expand bilateral cooperation in all areas in a follow-up to their meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in New Delhi. And now let's get you news from across the world. Britain's King Charles will appear on the cover of the magazine Big Issue on his 75th birthday. The magazine is sold by homeless and vulnerable people. Charles has also authored an article for the magazine about the importance of finding ways to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. Versatile recording artist SZA led this year's Grammy Award nominations with 9 nominations. She's ahead of industry heavyweights Taylor Swift, Miley Cyrus and Billie Eilish. The 34-year-old snagged nominations for Album of the Year with SOS and Record of the Year and Song of the Year for Kill Bill. The winners will be announced at an awards ceremony scheduled for the 4th of February. European Space Agency Chief Joseph Ashebar warns that the melting of polar ice caps and glaciers is very critical. He also was speaking on the sidelines of the One Planet Polar Summit on the situation in the poles. The agency chief called on political leaders to recognize the importance of climate change. The summit was attended by delegates from 40 polar and glacial nations in Paris. We are going for a short break, but still to come on DD India Live. Judge Yellen Cannon refuses to delay former president's trial in the case of former U.S. President Donald Trump. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng agrees to intensify communication on economic issues. And UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak hosts Diwali reception at Downing Street.
Welcome to a happy place. To nature's warm embrace. Witness the power of faith. Fruits of hard work and protectors of Mother Earth. Unique in every way. Discover something new every day. A small state with big ambitions. And a bigger heart. Mizoram welcomes to love, laughter and celebrations.
Welcome back after that short break. You're watching DD India Live with me, Deepika. Well, in a major setback for former U.S. President Donald Trump, Judge Yellen Cannon refused to delay the former president's trial in the documents case till after the 2024 presidential elections, and it will still have the trial in May next year. Trump's indictment in the case alleging mishandling of classified documents has loomed over his candidature. The Republican frontrunner has pushed repeatedly to move this federal criminal trial and others past the November 2024 presidential election, citing how busy his and his lawyers' schedules are, his demands on the campaign trail and the complexities of the case. Democratic U.S. Senator Joe Manchin, a maverick who has often bucked party leadership in the past 2 years, said he will not seek re-elections in 2024, greatly hurting his party's chances of holding the West Virginia seat. The move by the 76-year-old lawmaker will imperil Democrats' narrow 51-49 majority. Republicans hold the governor's office and the rest of the congressional delegation in a state that Republican Donald Trump won by a wide 69-30% margin over Democrat Joe Biden in the year 2020 presidential election. Manchin, who took office in 2010, has been a key vote on every major piece of legislation of President Biden's tenure as a moderate representing an increasingly conservative state. His support was critical to passage of Biden's sweeping $1 trillion infrastructure law, one of the president's key domestic accomplishments. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Friday that she and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng agreed to intensify communication on economic issues, but also warned him to crack down on Chinese companies that supply material support to Russia for its war in Ukraine. Yellen said she raised the issue during 2 days of meetings with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, expressing concerns that equipment helpful to Russia's military was evading sanctions and getting to Moscow to aid its war against Ukraine.
We do see evidence that there are Chinese firms, and I'm certainly not saying with the knowledge of the Chinese government, but some Chinese private firms that may be aiding in the flow of this equipment and material to Russia, as well as some financial institutions that could be involved in facilitating that flow. So I stressed in our conversations that it's critical to us that companies not provide material support for Russia's defense industrial sector, and that we were prepared to put in place further sanctions.
In Spain, protesters set off flares in Madrid on Friday as acting Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez set for a new term. A day after securing the backing of Catalan separatist party Junts, Sánchez secured the backing of Basque Nationalist Party PNV. The more complicated deal was the one secured on Thursday with them. The deal included a law granting amnesty to those prosecuted over Catalonia's attempt to secede from Spain, accusing Sánchez of putting the rule of law at risk. The support of Junts and PNV takes Sánchez over the line with an outright majority in the 350-member lower house in a vote due to take place in the coming days. Pressure is growing on British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to fire his Interior Minister after comments made about the police. Home Secretary Suella Braverman wrote a newspaper article suggesting London's police force is biased in its handling of pro-Palestinian marches. DD India correspondent Julia Chapman reports from London.
As protesters take to the street on Saturday, the police response is being watched very closely. Almost 2,000 officers will be present in London as protesters call for civilians in Gaza to be protected at the same time as ceremonies are held to mark Remembrance Day. There had been calls to ban this week's demonstration because of the day that it falls on. London's police force says there were no grounds to ban the march. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said he believes holding it on a day of remembrance is disrespectful. But after meeting the head of the Metropolitan Police, he acknowledged the right to peacefully protest. His Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, seems to have a different view. In an article in the Times newspaper, she accused the police of showing favouritism towards certain protest groups. It later transpired that the article had not been approved by the Prime Minister's office. That has led to accusations that Braverman has undermined Rishi Sunak's authority. Downing Street says there is an internal process going on to establish how the article came to be published. But a spokesperson says the Prime Minister has full confidence in his Home Secretary. Other cabinet ministers have distanced themselves from her comments, which some have accused of impinging on the independence of law enforcement. The Metropolitan Police says continued protest and rising hate crimes are causing fear and anxiety among London's Jewish communities, who it said had a right to feel safe. The force says it will do everything it can to ensure Remembrance Day events are not disrupted. Julia Chapman in London, reporting for DD India.
Now, staying with the UK, celebrations are continuing across the world to mark Diwali. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, a practicing Hindu, hosted a reception at Downing Street. Elsewhere in the country, there are hundreds of events taking place. DD India were invited along to the Diwali celebrations at the University of Bristol, which is home to hundreds of Indian students. DD India correspondent John Beaver reports from Bristol, United Kingdom.
They may be 7,000 kilometres from home, but for hundreds of Indian students, Diwali is a chance to celebrate their shared culture. This event has grown significantly in recent years and is one of many organised by the University of Bristol's Indian Society.
It's not just Diwali, but it's every Indian festival here. The thing is, when you're in India, you don't know the importance of your culture, but when you travel so far, you get to know how important it is to stick to your roots and remember the good memories. You start missing your family, and this is one way to create a family here.
For some here, this is less a taste of home and more a chance to learn about the culture and traditions of an increasingly sizable student group.
It's wonderful to have more and more Indian students now say they're the biggest group of overseas students to the UK now. They've just overtaken China. And many want to stay and work here, which is wonderful because that then enriches our work communities, enriches our workplaces.
Like all good Diwali celebrations, food played an important part, as well as other traditional activities.
From the Prime Minister downwards, Diwali celebrations are taking place across the UK. And with almost 2 million people here who say they're of Indian heritage, it's no surprise that there are so many celebrations.
The University of Bristol has a well-respected Bollywood dance society, and what better time to perform than at the Diwali celebrations.
You not only connect with people who are from home with you, but it's like people that want to learn about you. And I never feel bad telling someone about my culture, telling someone where I'm from.
I find a sense of community here, and it's always nice to just be a part of such stuff because it feels like home.
The celebration of this ancient tradition ended in a more modern way, as the latest generation of Indians in the UK came together to mark Diwali and make new friends a long way from home. John Beaver in Bristol, reporting for DD India.
Thousands have been displaced in Somalia and neighbouring countries in East Africa following a historic drought. The United Nations released aid of $25 million and described it as once-in-a-century event. Around 1.6 million people in Somalia could be affected by the heavy seasonal downpours that the UN says have worsened by the combined impact of El Nino and Indian Ocean dipole. The floods, which followed heavy rains that started in early October, have already killed at least 29 people and forced more than 300,000 from their homes in Somalia and parts of Kenya. Northern French farmers expressed worries after persistent flooding in the region this week that led to losses in their crops and livestock. Days of heavy rains in the northern French departments have caused local rivers to overflow and flood houses, prompting the evacuation of residents as over 100 towns are on the red alert. The Weather Bureau have put many regions to remain in red alert for flooding, whereas the French authorities have said dozens of towns to be considered in a situation of natural disaster. Pakistan has been asked by the International Monetary Fund to ensure strict implementation of anti-money laundering laws. The Federal Board of Revenue and the State Bank of Pakistan officials briefed the IMF regarding anti-money laundering and suspicious bank transactions during talks in Islamabad for the next review for the delivery of the $700 million loan tranche. The sources said that the SBP briefed the international lenders on Pakistan's economic performance from July to March, while the FBR officials briefed the visiting delegation about tax crimes and also presented a report. You're watching DD India Live, and now it's time to get you all the latest from the world of sports. In a major setback to Sri Lankan cricket, the cricket governing body, International Cricket Council, has suspended Sri Lanka cricket membership of the ICC with immediate effect. The ICC board met yesterday and determined that Sri Lanka cricket is in serious breach of its obligations as a member, in particular the requirement to manage its affairs autonomously and also ensure that there is no government interference in the governance, regulation and/or administration of cricket in Sri Lanka. The conditions of the suspension will be decided by the ICC board in due course. Earlier, the Sri Lanka government had sacked the SLC, or the Sri Lanka Cricket Board, following the team's disastrous show at the World Cup, whereas it lost 7 of the 9 games. Sri Lanka Cricket Board was reinstated by the Court of Appeal, thus further deepening the crisis in the country's cricket governing body. Australia will be looking forward to maintain their momentum ahead of the knockout stages when they tackle Bangladesh side, which is already out of the race for the semi-final place at the ongoing ICC Men's Cricket World Cup. Australia have now won 6 matches on the trot at the World Cup and will be keen to make it 7 in a row prior to a cutthroat semi-final with South Africa scheduled for next week. Openers David Warner and Travis Head missed out against Afghanistan last start and will be keen for a big score, while in-form spinner Adam Sampa has the lure of becoming the leading wicket taker at the tournament if he can register another big haul. While out of contention for a semi-final berth, Bangladesh can move closer to ensuring qualification for the ICC Champions Trophy tournament scheduled to take place in 2025 with a victory over here. Their task will not be easy though, with inspirational skipper Shakib Al Hassan sidelined with a finger issue, and also likes of stand-in skipper Najmul Hossain Shanto will need to step up in his absence. The match will start at 10:30 a.m. according to Indian Standard Time. In another match, Pakistan will face England in their last league game at Eden Gardens on Saturday. Pakistan will face for the improbable task of beating England by 287 or more runs to qualify for the semi-finals. If England bats first, then Pakistan need to chase the target in 15 balls, that is 2.3 overs. New Zealand's 5-wicket victory over Sri Lanka with 26.5 overs to spare has made the task challenging for Pakistan. Though such a scenario is impossible to achieve, mathematically it is still possible. India, South Africa and Australia have already sealed their spots in the final 4, and New Zealand will have 1 foot into the knockout stage. While the defending champions England are out of the race already owing to the mediocre performance in this edition. The 2019 champions have shown their pride to play for their final league game. Having won just 2 out of the 8 contested matches, England will eye to win their successive games in this edition. And that's all for this edition of TT India Live. But let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly known as Twitter, and Instagram. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I am Deepika Mehto. From all of us here in New Delhi, wishing you and your family a very happy Festival of Life, a very happy Diwali.